In letter 16, Screwtape asks Wormwood, where is the patient going to church? What are you about? How come you're not giving me any information about where he's worshiping? One of the things we have to understand about this letter is the different ways of Christian organization. Now, there are all sorts of different ways that Christians organize themselves, but there are two basic ones. One is the parochial principle, and the other is the congregational principle. So, for example, if you are an Anglican or an Episcopalian, your community is divided into parishes. A region will be divided into parishes which each have their own church. So basically what you're getting from one church to the other is pretty much the same. There are going to be variations. Different Anglican communities will have perhaps different emphasis or have perhaps their own flavor. But by and large, you're talking about almost a kind of branding, that you have branches of the same kind of product. Then, on the other hand, there's the congregational principle. The congregational principle is where you have Christians gathering, many evangelical groups are like this, where it's not a common set of rituals, beliefs, dogmas that are divided by region, but more individual pastors or individual groups spring up, set up shop, and have no kind of central organization, or may have some kind of loose affiliation with each other. But the emphasis is primarily on the individual church itself, not on different branches, as it were, of the same thing. What Lewis is saying through this letter, through Screwtape, is that there is something very helpful about the parochial model, because what it does is emphasizes a commitment to a set of rituals, dogmas, an expression of Christianity, and it leaves aside as much as possible the personal element. In other words, that you're choosing a parish because it's there, not because you have your own personal tastes, likes, or dislikes. That can always be the risk of a kind of non-denominational congregational form, is that people church shop. They go from church to church to church and until it satisfies sometimes things that are entirely legitimate desires, but it can also be the satisfaction of personal whims or personal taste that has nothing to do necessarily with what's at the heart of Christianity. So when Screwtape is giving this advice, hey, he keeps going to the same church, Lewis is appealing here to this parochial sense, this assent to something that is a common form of belief and practice, and that you're trying to de-emphasize your own personal likes and dislikes. He says, if you can't get this guy church shopping, going around to all sorts of different parishes, you might get him out of the parish he's in, because there's some other parishes out there that I think would be helpful at wearing down his faith. Because of the pastors at these various parishes, they have their strengths and they have their weaknesses. One pastor that Screwtape recommends is a fellow that he refers to as the vicar. And the vicar has this outlook that somehow he's talking to a group of people who are skeptical and hard-headed. And so he's always trying to accommodate what he thinks is their unbelief. The fact of the matter is, they don't have all the kind of doubts and reservations and problems that the pastor has. So he's perpetually scandalizing and shocking them with his preaching, which really is so much on the other side that it ends up compromising essential teachings on the faith. Quite frankly, he shocks his parish with his unbelief. There's a wonderful little essay by Lewis on scripture interpretation in his volume on Christian Reflections, where he talks about how it is that it used to be that pastors would scandalize their parish because they would have so much more depth and so much greater commitment and faith than a lot of their parishioners did. And he said, now in the Church of England, it's almost exactly the opposite. It's often the case that the parishioners have a deeper faith than the pastor, and they're often scandalized by how little he believes. Another parish that Screwtape recommends is Father Spike. Father Spike has this kind of rebel outlook. One day he'll be a communist, the next day he'll be a fascist. The only thing that seems to connect his preaching is hatred. He can't bring himself to preach anything but what will, as Screwtape puts it, shock, grieve, puzzle, and humiliate his parents and their friends. This is somebody who really wants to stand out, who really wants to be unconventional and original. Screwtape says the one problem with him is he probably really believes. But nonetheless, this might also be a good place to send our patient. Now, something that you have to be aware of, or at least helps to be aware of as you're reading this letter, within the Church of England, there are divisions between what's called High Church and Low Church. Remember that in the 1500s, the Church of England under Henry VIII and then under later monarchs broke away from the Catholic Church and in some sense held on to a number of teachings and beliefs and rituals which it inherited from Catholic belief, but also was profoundly influenced by Calvinist and Lutheran reformations. So the Church of England, for many in the Church of England, they see what they practice as a kind of via media, that is, a middle way between things that are traditionally perhaps would be described as Catholic and, on the other hand, things that are much more radically Protestant. What is referred to as High Church in England tends to be things that are where there's greater emphasis on ritual and continuity with that Catholic tradition. What's called Low Church tends to be more Protestant, Calvinist, evangelical in its expression. Less emphasis on ritual, more emphasis on scripture, preaching, and so on. Lewis never liked these kinds of divisions. He always described himself as being neither high nor low. And it comes out in this letter that he really thought that the person who was High Church needed to avoid things that would scandalize and irritate the Low Church person. And the Low Church person, conversely, they needed to avoid doing things that might scandalize or annoy or irritate the person who was High Church. He really thought that what St. Paul offered in 1 Corinthians, that Christians should be sensitive to the burdens of conscience of others, that was something that if it were practiced in the Church of England, would, as he puts it, allow it to be a hotbed of charity. And that's something for which Lewis wished, but obviously is very difficult to achieve. The principle, I think, that Lewis tries to convey in this letter, you see in the preface to Mere Christianity. He talks about divisions in Christianity, not just divisions within, say, the Church of England or within Baptists or Lutherans, but also those very divisions, what we would call denominational divisions or divisions among communions. And he'll say, we have to seek the truth, but our way of seeking the truth is not, do I like this kind of service or do I like these kind of people? It's, is there truth here? Is there holiness here? That as you're knocking on the doors of these different communions, that's the principle that you have to use. At the same time, you have to be sensitive and respectful of people who have chosen other doors. That doesn't mean that you believe they're right, but it does mean that you respect that their discernment has led them to what it is that they believe to be right. In the next letter, what we're going to do is look at the vice of gluttony and how it is that gluttony can take forms that you might not expect.